Ons eerste gas in die ateljee all the way from London, or England, I must say, Philip Lymbery, and hy's die hoofuitvoerende beampte van Compassion in World Farming. A big welcome, Philip.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me along.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. And I just want to say, the cow on my T-shirt died of natural causes.
Fantastic.
It's very important to say that.
Let's just get one thing straight.
But we'll get to everything. I want to start just with a bit of background about yourself. Academically, how did you end up? How did you start Compassion in World Farming? And you're also an avid bird watcher.
I am. Well, I've been a wildlife enthusiast since I was a small boy. My granddaddy gave me a field guide, a bird guide, and I was off, absolutely in love with wildlife. And as I grew older, I went into the packaging industry. That's where I started out. Before getting a job with Compassion in World Farming as an assistant way back in 1990. I've been with the organization pretty much for the last 27 years in different roles. I'm now privileged to be the chief executive. And, for my sins, I've started writing books, which is why I'm here. I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Winchester, which also keeps me busy. So delighted to be here, and thank you so much for having me in Pretoria.
And we're going to talk about your books. But first, Compassion in World Farming. You've won numerous awards. Breakthroughs that you had in the European Union and in Europe in terms of the way chickens were treated and even calves, the way they were moved. Just tell us a bit of background. Are you like a watchdog organization? Or what do you exactly do day to day?
So Compassion in World Farming is an advocacy organization, is an organization where we essentially bring pressure for change, for compassionate change, to make sure that cows, whether they're on your T-shirt or on farms, are treated humanely, along with chickens and pigs. We operate in 12 different countries. We have an office in Cape Town. We're headquartered in England. And we operate in the US, in China, across Europe. We press for an end to factory farming. So that's the kind of conditions where hens that lay eggs are kept in cages where they can't even stretch their wings, or pigs can't turn around for months at a time, or cattle in feedlots where they're crammed and fed hormones and unnatural diets. These are the kind of things that we work avidly to stop. We've had some great successes in Europe. We've banned battery cages, barren battery cages across Europe. We've banned veal crates, tiny calf crates, which were like premature coffins for the animals. So we've got that practice stopped. We also got animals recognized as sentient beings in Europe. So this is a legal recognition that they feel pain and suffer, and if you let them, they can feel a sense of joy. That was a real breakthrough. What we also do is we work with companies. We work with over 800 companies internationally, including Woolworths and others here in South Africa. And over the last 10 years, we've worked with companies that have made commitments to, for example, move away from selling eggs from caged hens to only selling cage-free or free-range eggs. And in this respect, we have got company policies that benefit more than 1 billion animals every year with better lives.
That's amazing. So, Philip, the question for social media was, will you ever be able to stop eating meat? Just to find out, South Africa is a meat-loving country, and there's 70 billion animals producing basically meat and eggs in the whole of the world. And now you're saying you're affecting, at least helping 1 billion of these animals. But don't you get depressed thinking of the other over 60 billion animals, and probably, let's say, even if it's just 10% that's suffering, it's just immense.
The suffering is immense. That's the scale of the challenge, but also it's the opportunity. Knowing as a chief executive of Compassion in World Farming that the decision that I took with the board 10 years ago has resulted in 1 billion animals with better lives. That is, so I look at the positives. And what we're trying to do, we're not trying to linear style work out. So 10 years, it took 1 billion animals. So how long will it take to get 50 billion? So what we're trying to do is to get buy-in from companies and governments and people so that we get to a tipping point, a point where momentum snowballs and becomes unstoppable. So that's our aim. I should also mention that this isn't about meat or no meat.
Yes.
So Compassion in World Farming is not saying, people should go vegetarian.
Yes.
What we're saying is, let's talk about our food, let's understand how it's produced, and let's realize that rather than having a caged egg, an egg from a hen that's been kept in the most cruel conditions for all of her life, let's have a free-range egg. It's not only better for the bird, it tastes better, it's better nutritionally. What's not to like?
That's a fact. And that's the thing, it's a mind shift. And I must be honest, for me it's very important if I look at eggs, especially eggs, I will go, and like you say, you work with retailers that goes that way a lot more. If we talk about your books, let's start with Farmageddon, and it was the true cost of cheap meat. And it was quite interesting. You think you're just paying for the meat, but we're paying basically on 3 levels. The environment's suffering, but there's this whole, just inform us about the 3 levels.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. People don't realize that it looks cheap, but actually isn't, because we pay 3 times. First at the checkout, the second through our tax dollars in subsidies for agriculture, which drives intensification. And the third is in the cleanup cost to our health and to the environment. And those costs are huge. So, if you look at the health cost alone, it is things like having, the fact that cheap meat, generally speaking, is high in saturated fats. It's lower in health-giving nutrients compared to free-range or pasture-fed equivalents. And that has a big effect on our health, not to mention the fact that half the world's antibiotics are fed to farm animals, much of it in factory farms, really to keep the animals alive and growing in distressing conditions, in conditions where they would otherwise get diseased and die. What that antibiotic input into factory farms does is it gives rise to antibiotic-resistant superbugs and therefore helps us to squander that modern medical miracle of antibiotics. We could be, in a few short years, according to the World Health Organization, we could be facing a post-antibiotic era where currently treatable diseases will once again kill.
You see, that's why we need to be warned. Philip, we're going to take this conversation further a little bit later.
Thank you.
Bly ingeskakel op die Groot en Byt. Ons gaan sport gesels net hierna. En van sport na farming. Ons praat Philip Lymbery en hy is die hoofuitvoerende hoof van Compassion in World Farming. So we just discussed, welcome back, or welcome again, Philip. We discussed Farmageddon, the true cost of cheap meat, but the new book, Dead Zone, where the wild things were, is a bit more positive approach than Farmageddon. So what was the main aim with this book?
Well, with Dead Zone, Where the Wild Things Were, what I was trying to do was tell another aspect of the story. The book really charts my story of going around the world for 2 years, getting under the skin of the industrial agricultural industry. And what I found was that factory farming, keeping farm animals caged, crammed and confined, not only is cruel to countless farm animals, it is also a major driver of wildlife extinctions. So what I wanted to do was bring that to life, to bring that to people in a storytelling way, but also to bring the positives, to bring hope, to bring out wonderful heroes, farmers that are bringing landscapes to life, that are saving wildlife, that are keeping animals in decent conditions, and ultimately showing that there is a much better way.
And that's the thing, the scary part, if we look at agriculture, basically 1/3 is used for producing crops and food and meat, but in the last 40 years, 50% of fish, wild animals, have disappeared. In the last 40 years. That's shocking. Where are we heading with this?
Well, exactly. In the last half a century or so, since the widespread adoption of factory farming, half the world's wildlife has disappeared. We are heading to that being 2/3 and so on. Wildlife is disappearing, and with it, is going our life support systems as a society, because we depend on the ecosystem. For example, industrial agriculture is behind the decline in pollinating insects like bees, which are needed, which are absolutely needed for the pollination of a third of all of our crops worldwide. What is also taking a real battering from industrial agriculture is our soils. And the United Nations warns us that if we continue as we are, we as a global society have just 60 years left before our soils are gone. And then what? So we have just a few short decades to turn this around. It's a serious situation. We need to move away from industrial agriculture and move to conservation agriculture, to regenerative agriculture, where farm animals are restored to their ecological niche as grazing animals as part of mixed farming and grazing farming. And here in South Africa, we have the perfect environment for it. We have a lot of the landscape is pasture. We should use that to best effect.
Yeah, that's a thing. Don't you get depressed sometimes? Because I'm just thinking, if you take capitalism, if you take making money, if you take corporate companies and factory farming, it's difficult for me to see it disappearing or getting more and more balanced because they want more money.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like an uphill battle, but we have to remember that factory farming has been around for about 50 years. So it's a very recent development against an agricultural history of 10,000 years. So what my organisation is aiming to do is to end factory farming within, by 2050. We need to do that for all of our sakes. But I think one of the things I discovered in my journey on writing Dead Zone is that there are two aspects of factory farming. There's the bit which we've increasingly come to know about, that animals are taken off of the land, off of pastures, and they're crammed into cages or feedlots. And that's very cruel. We know that. But actually, what we've often overlooked is the fact that what looks like a space-saving idea actually isn't, because we then have to grow their feed elsewhere, using vast areas of precious arable land to grow crops that could have been feeding people. And in this way, we squander huge amounts of corn, of soya, of wheat, and so on. And to quantify that for you, factory farming wastes enough cereals and soya to feed
the whole world, basically.
An extra 4 billion people on the planet.
Not even just the population, an extra 4 billion.
An extra 4 billion people.
I'm going to leave you with that fact. Let it sink in. We're going to have this conversation after the news. We're going to go on with it. Thank you, Henry. We continue our conversation with Philip Lymbery, and he's the Chief Executive of Compassion in World Farming. So we're going to discuss your book because you're launching it in South Africa. But before that, you said something that with agriculture, we need to work, and it's working with nature, not against it. And I think that's the balance that you really want to bring across.
That's exactly it. What I'm asking for, calling for, is a fusion between food farming and nature, bringing the two things together. Because at the moment what's happening is industrial agriculture is meaning that that not only do the farm animals disappear from the land into cages and crates, but because we have to grow their feed on scarce arable land, everything else disappears too. The trees, the bushes, the hedges, the wildflowers, along with the insects and the seeds that depend on them. And so the birds, the bats, the bees disappear. And what I've discovered through the Dead Zone journey is that also on other continents, jaguars and Sumatran elephants and penguins in South Africa are disappearing. So it's a great disappearing act just to produce this crop that we feed to factory farmed animals, and then most of the food value of that crop, be it calories or protein, is then wasted in conversion to meat, milk and eggs. So factory farming makes no sense whatsoever. What to me is the most efficient way of producing meat and milk? Well, is to keep animals on pasture, to keep them rotationally. A cow on a grassy hillside is the most efficient. But you see, the industrial agriculturalists have reframed the debate because they don't want the cow on a grassy hillside to be seen as efficient because it doesn't make money for them. There's no need for the feed companies because they just eat grass. There's no need for the pharmaceutical industry because the cow doesn't get sick. There's no need for the chemical industry because you don't need artificial fertilizers and pesticides. So what I'm saying is let's return, let's move forward actually to that fusion between food farming and nature. And what does that look like? Well, good rotational land-based farming where the animals are on the farm, grazing, moving around, perhaps interspersed with crops, perhaps rotationally on pasture, not overgrazing, but in balance.
And the book's been launched. It's tonight.
It's being launched tonight at Exclusive Books in Hyde Park in Johannesburg. Yeah, at 6 o'clock. So if you're there, do come along.
Yeah, and just a last thought. The most difficult struggle at this stage, is it government, private companies, or farmers? What do you really struggle with to convince?
I think that we need governments to roll up their sleeves and get involved. This is so serious. We need governments to set the right policy angle to support farmers who want to do the right thing. And there are many of them. There are many of them, but people can get involved too. You know, people can support compassion in world farming and get involved in our campaigns to put pressure on governments to work with corporations to bring about this better day. And also, we can help with our food choices 3 times a day by choosing meat, milk, and eggs from free range, pasture-fed or organic. In this way, we can help not only eradicate an awful lot of farm animal cruelty, but we can save wildlife and provide our families with better food.
Philip, thank you so much. It was a fantastic having you here. It was fantastic having you here.
Thank you.
Let us know when you're back in South Africa.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me along. It's been a real pleasure.
All of the best with the book.